sing along. Under the sea, sing your glory to the Lord.
All right. Appreciate you making your way back from lunch, and we're going to make a nice segue. As I was telling you, we had an address from a physicist before lunch, and we're going to continue that with a gentleman who also has a background in physics. He's got a pretty impressive CV here. He's theoretical physics at Hebrew University. He's a licensed patent attorney, so if you've got some inventions you want to talk to him about, you can talk to him about that. 25 years in that industry, general manager at Hillel Educational and taught at Rikani School for Economics at Tel Aviv. Has a broad range of background and disciplines he's experienced in. He's the editor of the publication of the Talmud Bavli with Rashi embedded, and it was previously with Ram and Yeshivat Hasider, and he is currently a Sagan with the Av Beit Din of the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. And of course, if it's my understanding is right, a Sagan is sort of an officer, if you will. So he'll explain all of that to us. So please welcome Rabbi Yeshayahu HaKohen Hollander.
Thank you, Jim. We met in Yerushalayim about 3 years ago now?
Yes, 2006.
2006, so it's not 2.5 years. And I was very glad to meet Jim again now. This talk is called I Have a Vision, not, for instance, a vision, because I intend to speak somewhat personally. It's the first time meeting you, and we should get to know one another. First, I want to thank the Almighty for getting me involved in the development of the Noahides Movement. Only the Almighty could have taken me such a winding path to bring me here. I'll tell you the winding path. If I had not met Rabbi Steinsaltz 53 years ago, and I had not remained his friend throughout this time, I wouldn't be here. If it were not that my very close friend, Alav Shalom, who was killed in the Yom Kippur War, he was close to Rabbi Steinsaltz also. If he had not been killed in the war, I probably wouldn't be here. If it were not for the founding of the Nascent Sanhedrin, I would also not be here. The way I got to the Sanhedrin was I went to the wedding of the daughter of Aryeh Twig, and Rabbi Steinsaltz was there, and the Sanhedrin had just been founded, and he said, would you be willing to join? Just a chance meeting at a wedding, you know. So that's the way. And now, if it were not for the mistakes made by the Nascent Sanhedrin in the beginning of its efforts with the Bnei Noach movement, I would not be here. And if it were not for the encouragement of my wife, I would not be here. And if it were not for the efforts of Mr. Peterson, I would not be here. So after thanking the Almighty, I want to thank Mr. Peterson personally and publicly for enabling me to come and the opportunity to meet so many God-loving people who have made such an amazing decision to listen to the Word of God as given to Moses, transmitted through Jewish traditions. Each of you is my master in courage, in daring, and in originality. I have the deepest respect for each and every one of you who went in the path of our most famous Noahide, Abraham, our forefather, in their quest for the correct, direct relationship with God. It is only as a representative of Jewish tradition and knowledge that I have right to stand here among you. I have called this talk I Have a Vision and not I Have a Dream, like Martin Luther King, because I think that vision is something that is seen as, that is, the person with the vision, it's something very real. And the word dream indicates it's not reality. Additionally, and more importantly, vision has a connotation of coming from HaShem, and a dream comes from the subconscious. My vision extends probably much further than my lifespan. That's the nature of visions. In my vision, I see the people of the earth recognizing HaShem, gladly taking upon themselves the so-called 7 commandments, the Rainbow Covenant, if you like, as it was later elaborated when the Torah was given at Sinai. We'll look only 20 to 30 years hence. That's where my vision is pretty clear. Maybe I'll call that 20 to 30 vision. I see many developing Noahide communities worldwide. I see Noahides having a major influence on world knowledge, on world opinion, on philosophy, and on the culture of the world, including politics. So for me, a beautiful vision. This vision was confirmed when I came to this convention, and I saw the children, babies, small children, adolescents. In Psalms chapter 8, it says, "Out of the mouth of babies and sucklings hath thou based fearlessness for those troublemakers, to put an end to enemies and those who would take vengeance." This is my translation after I've seen a few translations. One of the problems we have, we meaning you, but I'm part of you, is the problem of translation of the Tanakh. Anyone who has dealt in translations knows that it is impossible to translate anything. It is impossible to translate anything that is of importance, and any good literature cannot be properly translated because anything you translate, you're interpreting in one way, when in the original language, it has many meanings. Any translation is a narrowing of the original meaning. Now, out of the mouths of babies and sucklings, how thou based fearlessness is mentioned in Masechet Kala Rabati, in a collection of Mishnayot or Braitot, which are generally not learned in the Talmud, but they're part of the Talmud. And it says this Midrash. I will be very critical later in the talk of Midrashim. So I want to start off with the Midrash. You see, being critical doesn't mean that I'm against. It just means you have to take things critically and use your sense. It says this. I'm translating freely now. I didn't have time to translate it and write it up. When the children of Israel stood at the mountain of Sinai, the Almighty said to them, to Israel, "Are you accepting the Torah?" And they said, "Yes." And he said, "Can you bring guarantors? If I give you something, I want to get something in return. Do you have guarantors that you will keep your contract with me?" And they said, "Here are our children." And that's the meaning of the pasuk. Out of the mouth of babies and sucklings hast thou based fearlessness. And another midrash, which is also a beautiful midrash, it's in the Tosefta of Masechet Sotah, of Tractate Sotah, and it's in the Talmud, the Bavli, a little bit differently. Rabbi Yossi Aglili said, when the children of Israel came up from the sea, the Dead Sea, and they saw the enemies dead on the seashore, they sang the song Az Yashir Moshe the one Moshe said at that time. And at that time, a small child who was sitting on his mother's lap, and a baby who was suckling from his mother's breast, when they saw the Almighty, then the baby lifted his head, and the baby got up, and the baby who was nursing left the mother's breast, and they started to sing. Rabbi Meir said not only did the baby sing, but even the fetuses sang. You know? And he brings a verse to indicate that. Now, of course, one understands that it is hardly likely that in the womb the baby sang. So when we talk about midrashim, we're talking about what they mean and not what they say. But now I want to get back to the vision. Before I go any further, I must say that my vision is not binding on anybody. Anything I say, I'm not going to tell people what you should do or you should not do. I'm telling you what I think, what I feel, what I understand is good strategy, good tactic. Nobody must heed what I say, and needn't even listen to what I say. I'm not speaking as a rabbi to his congregation in terms of halakha. I'm trying to give you the result of my reflections. I will not be hurt, I will not be insulted. If you ignore it, you're going to have your deliberations, you're going to make your own decisions. I certainly will be curious what you do. Okay. Now we start about children. When we talk about children and education of children, we have a first principle. First principle is education must be in the best interests of each child. Each child is different than any other child. The more children you have and the more grandchildren you have, the more you know that everyone is an entirely different person. Even twins. Except perhaps identical twins. Some people say that identical twins are closer together. The education should help them to develop themselves. Jim mentioned that I was the head of a organization dealing with education. It was called Chanoch Lanar al Pi Darko. In Proverbs 22:6, it says, educate a youngster according to the youngster's inherent way, according to his natural capacity and talents, and even when old, he will not depart from it. Talents are God-given. A person is born with talents for music, talents for mathematics, for physics, for literature, for all sorts of things. After talents, we have inclinations. Inclinations, in part at least, are the responsibility of the parents. Parents can influence the inclination of their children. It is the duty of the parents and of the community to point out to the children, to each child, the important challenges and opportunities awaiting the youngster. Dr. Goldfinger said that a challenge overcome is something that gives happiness. That's true. And a challenge which is not overcome often does not. So you have to help your child see where his opportunities or her opportunities lie, and help them to understand it, and help them to overcome the challenge and to succeed in the opportunity. In a recent research in Israel, a very interesting result transpired. The results show that a determining factor in the way decisions children make is the way the young person perceives the likely reaction of his or her parents. Even in our tolerant culture, if a youngster thinks that a certain choice is entirely unacceptable to his parents, he is unlikely to make that choice. If he thinks that parents will accept his choice, he will more easily make the choices of which his parents do not approve. Parents do not approve, but if they will accept it, he will do it. As long as he thinks that they will live with it. An example, an unhappy example, is when I was a child, the rate of intermarriage of Jews and non-Jews in the US was 3%. Today it's about 50% or more. The major difference was now it's not that the Jews are so much more Orthodox than they were. The major difference is how the parents reacted to the announcement of a child that he would tend to marry a non-Jew. When I was a child, I didn't react that way, I just heard this, the way it was talked about by the older people, by my mother, who was at that time probably under 30. When I was a child, the normal reaction of a parent was to get hysterical. And to tell the child that if he does make this terrible choice, the parents and the siblings will sit shiva, will mourn the erring young person as if he had actually died. In those very rare cases, the 3%, when the youngster did proceed with it, the factually actually did mourn the young person publicly. That was very effective. Now, 40 years later, that behavior was considered unfair, unduly coercive, and the result was an increase of intermarriage. So if parents should make their feelings and their understandings very, very clear to their children where the limits are. Now, this is part of the talk, what I intend to say is about other limits that apply not only to children. Now, not only telling what one should not do, I think that it is very important for the Noahide movement to guide the children who have the capabilities to certain 3 fields I'm going to talk about. Our young men and women who have the ability and the interest should be encouraged to become scientists. Reason: the natural sciences are very important from various aspects. First of all, for our own understanding of the way the Almighty created and runs this world. Dr. Goldfinger said that it's only that it is His will, and it could change at any instant in time. And I do not challenge that. But the fact is that, as a rule, He doesn't change it so fast. So it's very important for everybody to understand how the world is, what the laws of nature, or the temporary laws of nature are. Secondly, of course, there are benefits from the knowledge of nature. There is technology derived from nature, medical technology, and so, of course, helping the world is very important. I think the third point is at least as valid as the other 2. I read the Scientific American. These pro-science people, pro-science politicians, they're waging a war against what is called intelligent design. We believe in intelligent design. It's designed by the highest intelligence. And I think it's incumbent upon us to fight to allow teaching of intelligent design, at least on an equivalent basis to the current version of Darwinistic evolution. And every person, every scientist who can make a contribution is very important. So children who have this ability, it would be helpful if they would be guided in this direction. An entirely different application for an entirely different kind of child. Another preferred application is media. The power of the media cannot be underestimated. We should try to have a fair share of that power. What is very important to know in this situation is that this kind of a career is fraught with danger, spiritual danger, and thus it is important that youngsters who choose this kind of career have daily spiritual support. Daily, not once a week. They should daily see face to face a personal tour, have a daily with a spiritual leader. When I was a young man at the university, I was part of an organization which was fighting the influence of Christian missions. And I was asked by Rabbi Lapian to try to find a girl who had gone astray, and he sent me to the brothels of Tel Aviv to find her. Well, you don't think, I spent to see him before and after every day. I didn't have to go to the mikveh every time. I didn't have any relations with any of the women. I don't want to tell you that, but just going into such a place is something that sometimes has to be done. And you cannot let a person go to such a place, or to places of spiritual danger, without having spiritual support on a daily basis. The third application would be a teacher or a Noahide rabbi. I don't know about the terminology, I'll get to that. This would be a wonderful vocation. I would like to say a few words about the limits of this vocation. It's very important. I said I'm going to talk about limits. At first I talked about the limits of children, now I'm going to talk about the limits of a Noahide rabbi. Recently there was some internet discussion about this term. Some people objected to the use of the term rabbi. I can understand that. If I had a good suggestion, I would promote it. What would you say about a teacher of Noahides Torah? Or Torah for a Noahides teacher, which the acronym of which is TNT. What a Noahide should not try to do is to become a decisor. A decisor. This is the technical term. I will explain the terms. To become a rabbi, you have to have certain knowledge. To become a decisor, you have to have a lot more. A decisor is a rabbi's rabbi. When a rabbi doesn't feel sure and he has the opportunity, if it's not Shabbat, then he turns the question to a decisor. Or if it's a difficult question, I have a personal acquaintance with a decisor. The most beloved decisor in our times was Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. I think at his funeral there were over 500,000 people in Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem you don't wait for a person to be buried. On that day that he died, he was buried. And 500,000 people stopped everything they were doing to come to his funeral. There are books about him. I'm pretty sure that some have been translated to English. You can call Rabbi Katz, he would know. Now, what are the prerequisites for being a decisor, and why I think that a Noahide cannot become a decisor? First of all, you have to have great knowledge. If you want to know what that entails, if you can find it, I'm sure it's been translated. There's a poem by Chaim Nachman Bialik. You've heard his name? Chaim ben Nachman Bialik was called the poet laureate of the Jews in the 20th century. He wrote a poem. He studied at a yeshiva. Then he decided being Orthodox is not for him. But he wrote about it. He wrote a poem, the Masmid. It's about, it must have been translated in English. I couldn't find it. I asked my cousins and they couldn't find it either. But it must have been translated to English. This means spending all one's energies from childhood, not from adolescence, from childhood learning Torah, Talmud, and Halakha. My cousin, Rabbi Nebensal, is a highly respected rabbi in Jerusalem. He is a disciple of Rabbi Auerbach, the disciple of Rabbi Auerbach. He taught himself to read at the age of 3, and he started reading books of Halakha at the age of 3. He has a photographic memory, so he can read from his memory. He can read page after page after page. He also has an unusual imagination, and he works very hard to state his ideas very simply. The knowledge of a decisor covers the whole of Jewish Halakha. On Sunday, I will talk about the unity of the Torah. Knowing one part well has great value, but you have to know the whole Torah to make informed decisions. Besides having encompassing knowledge, one has to have years of experience in a practical determining of halakha, of the way to go, of what one should do, of action items. A short example. Years ago, shortly about in the year about 200, when there was a disagreement between Rabbi Hollander, there were a few of them. one people know is from the Mishnah is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was taken out of Jerusalem at the time of the destruction. But there was Rabbi Yochanan who was, we have a lot more of his teachings, who lived after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He was the greatest Rosh Yeshiva in the land of Israel after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi passed away. And the fame of Rabbi Yochanan covered the whole of the Jewish world for hundreds of years. Now it occurs that there is a difference of opinion between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina was a dayan, a judge. The interesting thing is Rava, a central figure in the Babylonian Talmud, says that if Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina disagrees with the great Rosh Yeshiva Rabbi Yochanan, the halakha is according to the judge, not according to the Rosh Yeshiva. A person who makes practical decisions in the real world, his Torah is different than a person who learns academically. And to make real decisions in the real world, you have to have experience. You have to learn it by serving with someone who has done this for years, and you see the way this person addresses particular pressing problems. I have over the years asked many questions for many people, on behalf of many people, and I have it nearly in every case, in every personal case, questions that were considered to be insolvable were solved by the great decisors, not by an ordinary rabbi. He wouldn't dare. He may not even have the imagination. And he wouldn't have the daring because he doesn't have a tradition of going outside the normal limits and finding a particular solution. Besides knowledge and experience, to be a decisive one has to be of the nature of a tzaddik. I don't feel I can go into the subject what a tzaddik is. It is a subject that has to be handled with great sensitivity. Having said that, I am looking forward to see the first Noahide Teachers and Leaders Academy, and I will be happy to attend the opening ceremony and the first graduation. In my vision, I see a Noahide elementary school. I see Noahide teachers teaching our children and youngsters. What are they teaching? First of all, they're teaching Tanakh, of course. Great quantities of Tanakh. The children have to know what the scriptures say. It's not simple. On Sunday, I'm going to give a talk about a psalm, HaShamayim Asher Kvodel. It's 19, Psalm 19, and I will give a little bit of advice on how to learn, how you can learn also, without knowing Hebrew properly. Just a quick example. One of the verses that you probably are familiar with is a verse in Zephaniah. For then, I'll read only in English. For then I will turn to the nations in a clear language, and they may call upon the name of HaShem to serve him with one voice. Okay. What does to serve him with one voice seem to indicate? Well, I see a choir of people singing together in unison. Maybe bass and treble and alt and sopran and coloratura, maybe, but they're all singing with one voice, but that's not what the verse says. The verse uses a phrase that was used by Ray Peterson last night. It says, one shoulder, not one voice. I don't know why it was translated with one voice. As Mr. Peterson said yesterday, shoulder to shoulder. It's not a choir. It's like a pair of animals pulling a heavy weight. The implication of the metaphor is that all Noahides have to learn to work together, not only to talk together. In learning halakha, what is important? What is very important? Besides learning the mitzvot, the implication of the mitzvot, the details of the mitzvot, not only of the 7, because anything a community has taken upon itself is part of that child's tradition. A Noahide culture, and they has to know the Noahide culture and the ideological and practical reasons and purposes of every element at a very early age. Practical, not only symbolical. There are many things which we tend to explain to ourselves in symbolical terms. That's very good, but it's not enough. Everything we do has a meaning in the real world. I'll elaborate on that later. I'm going to talk a little bit now about Agadah. We talked about Halakha. Non-halachic issues are called Agadah. I thought I would have to play the naughty boy, but I'm not sure. After hearing talks this morning, I'm not such a naughty boy. I mean, okay. I see children have to be prepared to meet the challenges awaiting them. In every surrounding, the challenges are different according to each place and each culture. In the USA today, the USA is basically a Christian country which has some terrible cultural attributes. Children have to be prepared to handle the situation. Very young children have discussions on religion with other children. In our surroundings, in any case. Discussions take place in kindergarten at the age of 5 or even less. What our experience has to teach the children at that age is to know that other children have not had the good luck to be born into our family and our community. We hope later they will learn at a later stage the truth. And we don't want to argue with them, and we don't want to hurt their feelings, so we don't discuss religion with them. That is probably the easiest thing for our children to accept, for young children to accept. As they grow older, they will be taught all the reasons we are not Christians. There are books on that for older people. There have to be ways of instructing younger children in that also. When they go to school, when they go out to play in the park, they're going to be meeting educated young Christian children. The children's being Noahide has to be an essential part of their self-identification. Teaching will place emphasis on the episodes of history which influenced religions, including the history of Christianity when it broke off from Judaism. A child of 10 years should know very clearly why he or she are not Christians. In a predominantly Christian country, a Noahide child at that age should know more about the beginnings of the church, of the basis of Christianity and its fallacies, than the best children attending a church aged 5 years older than he. Usually children don't relate to children 5 years younger, but 3 years younger they still relate to. So if a child 10 years old meets with a child 13, he has to know to tell that child 13 years or 14 years that he knows better, and has to be truth, that he knows that the young Noahide child knows better than the Christian what the Christianity is all about. By adolescence, our children must be equipped to meet the intellectual challenges of the aggressive atheistic culture, including sexual morals and homosexuality. The child must know why we say homosexuality is an abomination, not a free choice, not an alternative lifestyle, but an abomination. We should teach the children the reasons at this age, when they're reached puberty and going beyond, and this has they've become interested in this field. We should teach the reason we have for fighting this particular sin. One of the reasons, at least, is because the leaders, the homosexuals, are attempting to corrupt the meaning of the family. This is part of a general trend towards postmodernism, telling us that everything is just a question of your point of view, or that there is no right, there is no wrong, there is no truth. Everything is just stories. They use the term narratives, which sounds better than stories, but that's what it's all about. There is no truth, everybody just has a story. Before college age, they must learn to meet the intellectual challenges of postmodernism. I don't know whether enough books have been written. There are books about this problem. People are addressing it, but children, before they go to college, should know that the problem exists, and know some solutions to it, and know where other solutions can be found, who their teachers are, in contradistinction to the teachers of the postmodernism, which makes things so much easier and so much more irresponsible. Now, another limits that I want to put. I want to discuss the relationship that I recommend between two very significant elements in Jewish writings, Midrash and Kabbalah. We have been discussing Kabbalah today. And we have heard very interesting talk by Rabbi, he's a relative of his is a friend of mine, Rabbi Bakst. I will get back to this. I was starting with the simpler things and go to the more difficult things, okay? As a rule, we have halachic midrash and agadic midrash. In other words, midrash which deals in halacha and midrash which deals in agadah. I'm reading from here because I'm going to give it later to Sam, and he can put it on the internet, so you don't have to take notes if you don't want to. But that will mean you'll have to reread it. So maybe you want to take just short notes. Okay. Halachic midrash connects the Torah to the halacha. What is written in the Torah is not entirely clear in every case. When the Torah says you have to do ritual killing, it does not give us a description of how that is done. This is part of the oral Torah. So we have to connect this halacha, oral Torah or halacha, which is a resultant of both. The Midrash points out how we can see reflections of the halacha in the Torah. Even though the Torah does not tell us that you use this kind of a knife, and you don't do this, and you do that, we can see reflections of this in the Torah. According to the Rambam, nearly all the Midrash of halacha consists of this tying things up. Not only according to the Rambam, which he lived in 1200, but even according to the Netziv, in his introduction to his commentary on the Torah, he talks at great length. I don't know what it's translated to English, but it indicates at great length that most of what our sages have done in interpreting the verses is interpreting the verses tendentially to show the connection between the Torah, the written Torah, and our halachic traditions, which derive from the same source as the written Torah. However, there is a small part of the Midrash Halacha which is actually a source of new decisions. But you cannot distinguish between the two kinds of exegesis by the language. The language of both is the same, and you have to know an awful lot to know when it is trying to tie up an existing halacha with a verse in the Torah, or whether it's really trying to derive a new halacha. It's interesting that in Europe, the Rambam lived in North Africa, in Egypt, first in southern Spain, then in Morocco, and then he went to Egypt. The European rabbis, a collection of explanations of the Talmud by rabbis in Egypt called the Tosafot during the Middle Ages, also state that what is expounded in books of pre-Talmudic exegesis often relates to rabbinical ordinances even though the scriptures are quoted and interpreted to demonstrate the halacha. So even in parts of written rabbinic tradition which seem to tell us that this derives from, in this way, from these verses, it ain't necessarily so. Okay? Now we come, having left halacha, we're going to, that's one of the reasons you have to be a very great student and learn an awful lot. And then we come to Agadic Midrash, which is not halachic, which is philosophy, which is very important. It's a body of literature, much of it demonstrating connections of verses in the Tanakh to non-halachic thought. And there are beautiful elaborations of verses in the Tanakh. Some of this appears in the Talmud, some appear in special compilations, And some midrashim appear throughout the generations up to including our times, particularly emphasized in the writings of Hasidim, for instance, in the parables of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. This is the kind of thing which could be included in some kind of midrash. Now, just as the use of the mythology of midrash does not prove the end result is correct halachic discourse, so it does not prove that the end result is correct non-halachic discourse. We do not use, we Jews do not use this phrase, even the devil can quote scriptures. But we do know that many ideas which are presented as being derived from the Torah are mistaken. Just as we know that learned Christians can quote the Torah and are sadly in the wrong. Now, the Rambam, one of he wrote about everything worth writing about, practically, nearly he covered every field. In his introduction to chapter Chelek in the tractate Sanhedrin, he relates to the problems we have with Agadah. And those who want to can try to get the Maimonides reader published by Izero Twersky, and there he has full translation. He says, "You must know that the words of the sages are differently interpreted by three groups of people." Hold your chairs. The first group accept the teachings of the sages in their simple literal sense. They hold such opinions because they have not understood science. One can only regret their folly. The second group also interpret literally, and therefore they decide that our sages are fools. The third group understood that our wise men have formulated their wisdom in analogies. Rambam continues saying this is the case even with the Holy Scriptures when whole passages are interpreted metaphorically. Thus, a major problem is understanding where a statement is to be understood literally and when symbolically or allegorically or metaphorically. For this we need a tradition of interpretation and deep and broad understanding. So I'll summarize that Midrash is to use, when we want to use Midrash, and I do use Midrash, it's to use only as a support of an idea, an elaboration, an illustration, and an inspiration. It cannot be used as the proof of the correctness of an idea. A basic reason is that the Midrash is often not the source, but the application of the idea in interpreting, using your idea to interpret the scriptures. Now, we all do that when we read anything. We're using our knowledge and our opinions to interpret it. And the Midrash does that also. Very often, the idea is, this is done in halachic, and even more so in agaric issues. Sometimes the most important part of learning the Midrash is trying to understand what the real issue is behind it. Not to understand it in midrashic terms, understand it in real terms, in our real world, or in the real world which that person was talking about, which may not be identical with our world. I mean, things have changed, over the generations. I will ostensibly change the subject, and I will talk about something that Rabbi Richmond said. When he spoke, at one point, I laughed, and he turned to me and said something like, I didn't get the words exactly, but I know that Rabbi Hollander will disagree. Well, he had given him an interpretation of a midrash, saying that Rabbi Akiva said that the people who ate the manna do not have part in the world to come. And the interpretation that he gave, I remember he said of Rabbi the Berditchever and of someone else also. Okay. And, well, I laughed. And Rabbi Rich made his remark. And I laughed again. And I shook my hand this way. They didn't understand my laugh. I laughed the first time, not because I disagreed, but because this was an obvious possibility of interpreting that midrash. And I was laughing at myself because I didn't think of it. I said, well, why didn't I think of it? The minute one says that the manna was not food which results in excretia, you are saying it is not real food. But it's some kind of spiritual food. And once you say that, well, I'll read the Midrash. I didn't have time to translate it. Okay, I'll read only the Rambam. That is, Rambam is quoting this Midrash. And he says, the first sages said that in the world to come, there is no eating, drinking, coition, but the righteous people sit with their crowns on their heads and benefit from the radiance of the divine presence. So, of course, if they're not eating and drinking, then they're in the world to come right away. If what they're eating and drinking is not eating and drinking, then they're already in the world to come. So it's an obvious thing. I should have thought of it myself. I just thought it was, my laughter was a recognition reflex. You have that. When people recognize something, sometimes they laugh. That's what it was. Chaim Soloveitchik, not Chaim Richman, Chaim Soloveitchik. I mean, we have to make difference between live Gedolim and people who are not live today. Chaim Soloveitchik, who was the first of the Soloveitchik dynasty, wrote in his book, Nefesh HaChaim, title I would translate as a play on words. Literal translation is the soul of the living. But it's also the soul of Chaim. And maybe he meant that as his own thoughts. It's a very original work. It's not an easy work to read. I don't know whether it's been translated to English. Anyway, it's a difficult work to read, and it is full of Kabbalah, which I will talk about later. It's full of Kabbalah. In this book he says that the world to come is not a future state of the world. The words indicate that it is some future state, somehow connected with Messiah or whatever. Before Messiah, after Messiah. The Rambam says, you probably know, those people who have read these passages, the Rambam says we don't know exactly what's going to happen, and we have no exact traditions on this, and everyone interprets these verses that apply to this in a different fashion, and this is all subjective thinking and not tradition. In any case, he says, the world to come is not a future state of the world, but is a superior state of the human soul. And people with the right prerequisites may experience the world to come while they are still alive here in this world. And the second time I laugh, because Rabbi Richman was right to suspect me of disagreeing with him. We often disagree, often about issues of Midrash Agadah. It's perfectly all right. Rabbi Richman talked about tzitzit. I will just add a little to what Rabbi Richman said. It is interesting that our tradition has put the commandment of tzitzit, which is written in the Torah in the middle of the book of Numbers, which we're reading now, together with the first two parts of the Shema Yisrael, which we say every day, morning and evening, when they're in the beginning of, close to the beginning of Deuteronomy. Why do they put these things together? Well, we can say that the first two parts, they're both in Deuteronomy, not one next to the other, but not very far away. But why did they take this and put it there? Well, the opening sentence says, "Hear, O Israel, HaShem is our Elohim, our judge, our leader. He is one." And the continuation of the first paragraph is the instruction to love HaShem, to learn Torah, and to observe Torah. The second paragraph, taken from Parashat Echev, not Vayetchanan, is to obey Hashem, our contract with God. If we keep all of His commandments, we will prosper in the promised land, and otherwise we will suffer. Both these two paragraphs tell us also, besides this greater issue, they tell you also the commandment of tefillin, of phylacteries, and of the mezuzah on our doorposts. And now, after getting these big issues, love of God and our contract with God, we have a sort of an anticlimax. We have an addendum. Do a particular commandment. It will remind you of the other commandments somehow. How it will remind you is not entirely clear, and the Midrash tells us about the color blue and Rabbi Richman talked about that. It has been pointed out, an interesting thing, and not midrashic, but archaeological explanation, that the Shema in all its 3 chapters is structured like an ancient ceremony of the royal guards. This is documented in various archaeological documents. The structure of this pledge of the royal guards is as follows. It starts with a pledge of allegiance to the king and a statement of adoration of the king, how great a king he is. Then a short summary of our relationship, of our contractual relation with the king, and then a description of the insignia worn by the king's guard. The inscription being the insignia is the tzitzit. And it's telling that we Jews are, people who wear this, are wearing the insignia of the Lord's guard, personal guard. I don't know whether Rabbi Richard mentioned this. I think he mentioned two points of these three things. The blue string, the ptil tchelet, is part of tzitzit. It's part of the tzitz, which Rabbi Richard brought, and it's also part of the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. And I leave it to you to fill out the significance of these 3 things. Now I'm getting to what has been discussed today, both by Rabbi Bakst. He gave you an example of learning Kabbalic texts, and Rabbi Goldfinger also talked about the problems, and I will also talk to the problems of our relation with Kabbalah. If we've talked about Midrashic Agadah, that's much less difficult and much closer to us than the ideas, the concepts, and the terminology of Kabbalah. First, a little history. When does Kabbalah first appear on the Jewish scene? Well, the Zohar appeared in the 13th century. Kabbalistic ideas, understandings, certainly preceded the Zohar. In some sense, the Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but many of the ideas predate him also. The word Kabbalah means tradition, received wisdom, and the tradition is that the ideas received from Adam, and the Sefer HaYetzirah was written by Abraham. I'm not going to argue these points. I don't know. I wasn't there. The problem we have with Kabbalah is not what the Kabbalah says, and not with the origins of Kabbalah. The problem we may have with Kabbalah is what happens when people are influenced by Kabbalah in their decision-taking. I will refer you to 2 catastrophes which happened as a result of Kabbalistic thinking. During the 17th and 18th century, we saw terrible results which derived from teaching Kabbalah after Rabbi Yitzchak Luria published his writings on Kabbalah. The first was Shabtai Tzvi. In 1625, he lived for 50 years, in 1625 to 1675, and later Jacob Frank. I don't want to elaborate. You can look it up on the internet and in encyclopedias. I have the temerity to relate a much earlier catastrophe to the study of Kabbalah. It was said today, that it's correctly said, that the Talmud says that 4 people went into to learn Kabbalah. Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher. One became an apostate, another went crazy. I don't remember the third, and the one who was said to have emerged unscathed was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was surely a very great Kabbalist. When the Romans put down the Bar Kokhba revolt, according to some estimates, 2.5 million Jews were murdered by the Romans. I mean, they probably had some fighting, were killed in battle, and the rest were just murdered. The spiritual leader of this revolt was Rabbi Akiva, who was great in Kabbalah. It is also well known that the Rambam said about Rabbi Akiva that he mistakenly believed that Bar Kokhba to be the Messiah. Is there no connection between this great mistake and the mysticism of Rabbi Akiva? By the grace of HaShem, on Shabbat 3 weeks ago, I read in a book by Rabbi Ben Amoseg, Jews and Humanity, that man, JC, was a Kabbalist. And he decided at that time that the time was ripe to disclose the secrets of Kabbalah, and he did so. I don't know. He bases this on Luke 12, verse 3. I don't know Luke, and I don't know chapter 12 nor verse 3, but those of you who may remember it can check him out on that. So maybe Christianity itself is a case of damage done by taking the hidden secrets of Kabbalah and teaching them publicly. I don't know. Some work should be done on that. Some university. On the other hand, Kabbalah has great value. Like Midrash, Kabbalah speaks to the soul, directly to the soul, much more directly than science and philosophy. So we have some kind of a dilemma on our hands. It's not a new dilemma. It's an old dilemma. In the first mission, chapter 2 of Tractate Chagiga says one should not discuss the creation, which is natural science, unless there were two besides the student, nor the divine chariot, which is mysticism, with one individual, unless he is a wise man who has much knowledge of his own. In the Talmud, I will skip a bit because it's getting late, it tells that Rabbi Hollander that it can only be imparted to a chief of a Beit Din. So you'll see how much knowledge he has to have before he begins learning Kabbalah. And only then when his heart yearns for this knowledge, if he has time. If he's the head of a Beit Din, he probably doesn't have time for that either, but okay. Having issued this warning, I am obligated to make another statement which seems to contradict what I just said. Nearly every great rabbi who I met, who I ever learned about, built in Kabbalah. So I cannot be against Kabbalah, and I am not against Kabbalah. Of course I'm not against Kabbalah. I am against people without sufficient preparation and safeguards learning Kabbalah. I am very much afraid of people who have learned Kabbalah, and know what they have learned, and try to use Kabbalah to make real-life decisions. On the Nascent Sanhedrin, we have people who are versed in Kabbalah, including Rabbi Ben Shor, who learned Kabbalah for 7 years at Yeshivat Beit El, which is the top Kabbalah yeshiva in the world, top of the top. And he told me that in his opinion, all Noahides, most Jews may not learn Kabbalah. Kabbalah is part of the spiritual world of many people. It brings people closer to God. In that sense, Kabbalah is helpful. So it begins to be dangerous when we begin using the terminology and concepts of Kabbalah to solve real problems in the real world. We heard the lecture from Rabbi Bakst, who is a descendant of the Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna. And I would like to ask, who understood what Rabbi Bakst was talking about? Okay, and do you understand the limits of your understanding? Very important. I think that was one of the most important lectures given, is that we understood something, and we understood very well that we don't understand. It's given us a lot for soul, a lot for thought, a lot for feeling. Woe to anybody who wants to base decisions in the world on the basis of that feeling, of that understanding. This is also what Dr. Goldfinger expressed very clearly. The use of Kabbalah is then for our soul, for our feelings, not for our decision making. It is not needed for decision making, according to the ancestor of Rabbi Bakst, because it's written short in this folder. Rabbi Bakst quoted this famous saying of Rabbi Eliyahu. He said that there is no halakha based on Kabbalah that disagrees with the halakha derived by normal means, except that the Kabbalistic result may be more demanding or more stringent. In other words, the real halakha is not what the Kabbalah says. You don't have to do what the Kabbalah says. The Kabbalah gives you an indication of something which is lifnimi shurat adin, which is more than you really have to do. So that's fine for people who want to do it. But it's not normative. It does not apply to the regular person. For most intents and purposes, the use of Kabbalistic terminology entails risking severe mistakes, does not bring them closer to correct decisions. I'll skip a bit. I see time is running faster than I thought. Now about communities. Noahide communities are a priority, great priority. Before we get to have Noahide schools, we have to have, with teachers in classes, we have to have communities. Can Noahides gather in one location to come and live together like Rabbi Katz said last night? If so, that would be wonderful. He mentioned that the Jews had to do this, were forced to do this. At the present, it seems unlikely, because people have to leave their homes, their jobs, their schools, move to a new location with questionable prospects. I don't know today whether there are enough Noahides to set up a real viable community. I don't know how many there are. If you want to set up a high school, you need probably at least about 10,000 people. So when I was talking about educating, I was talking about educating in a real-life situation where you don't have a closed society in which the children don't have to come in contact with Christians. How will the communities grow? I refer to a midrash. Having warned you about what a midrash is, I will refer to a midrash. It says in Shir Hashirim, the Song of Songs, thy neck is as a tower of ivory, thine eyes as the pools in Cheshbon by the gate of Bat Rabim. Thy nose is like the tower of Lebanon which looketh towards Damascus. And the Midrash says, Rabbi Hollander said, Rabbi Hollander, I spoke about him a few minutes ago. He said, in the future, Jerusalem will extend until it reaches the gates of Damascus. How far is it from Jerusalem to Damascus? Does anybody have an idea? It's not as far as you may think. It's only 135 miles from Jerusalem to Damascus. But nevertheless, a city with a diameter, say, of 135 miles, a pretty big city. How do we get from here to there? Well, how many people have been to London? Lived in London for any length of time? How did London develop? That? How did London develop from the little town it was, center of London, to the great megalopolis it is? Well, there were many townships which were separated from one another, and they grew. They grew and they spread until they emerged. Maybe that's what the Midrash is talking about Jerusalem. Getting back to the present non-Midrashic language, Noach communities could develop like Chabad communities. I want you to tell you first of all, I am not a Chabadnik. I am not a Chabadnik. Our Nasi, the president of the Sanhedrin, is a member of Chabad. Very important member of Chabad. I am very critical of many aspects of Chabad. I am a great admirer of Chabad. And I rationally, I agree with their statement that their Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, was worthy of being Mashiach. And later I can explain that, but I don't have time now. To my sorrow, he was not Mashiach. We are not looking here at present for Mashiach. We are looking for guidance on the direction we have to take in our real lives. What we can learn from Chabad is the way of the Shluchim, the emissaries of Chabad. I think this is an excellent model. What do? From my perspective, it looks like they play make-believe. They set up a Chabad house in the middle of nowhere, and Jews begin coming in. They accept any Jew, regardless of his or her behavior, ideology. All are welcome, like our forefather Abraham. In this Chabad house, besides hospitality, they do their own thing. They do what they think right. Anybody can join them or not join them. No coercion. They hold their religious services the same as they would in 770 in the house of the Rebbe. And they talk. They talk to the visitors. They talk with the visitors. And amazingly, in a few years, they have a vibrant community. Now, of course, the Rebbe chose the place in nowhere to which the emissary would go, according to the Rebbe's well-informed knowledge of the situation and the place. Another thing the Rebbe did, he developed a book of standard operating procedures for the shluchim, for the emissary. We have a suggestion before us, which I don't have time to go into now, of Roger Grattan, of what a standard preparation should be, and we have the Noahide Nations has a committee on syllabus and of leadership, and I recommended to Ray, and I recommend to all of you to listen to Roger Grattan on that. Now, in Tharabad, it's interesting, the bold people who become emissaries are usually young couples, newlyweds, beginning their life together. They would be asked by the Rebbe to leave the places they grew up in, to leave their families, and start a new community, disconnected except by phone, maybe by a video phone, from their families, from the communities. They start off entirely on their own. It's an amazing challenge. When they had babies, they had to set up a kindergarten. When the kids grew a little older, they had to set up a school, so they did. As they grew up, the community grew with them. But not everybody can be an emissary. Many can be trained and helped, and this is one of the aims of Noahide education, to recognize the potential and help young people to develop their potential, as I said before. This is the primary goal of education, of all education, to help people develop their capabilities. Now, discussing Noahide communities, we have another very important and difficult issue. Every Noahide today is a strong personality, otherwise he wouldn't be a Noahide. When strong personalities get together, they often clash. Now, what do we do about that? I take a model on the difference between Christianity and Judaism. Christianity is basically a religion of belief. If you accept JC, you're okay, as far as I know. Maybe we have some problems here and there, but that's a basic issue. In Judaism, it's not good enough to accept. You've got to practice. You've got things to do. It's a religion where commandments, laws, have to be performed or must refrain from other acts. It's a religion of doing. As a result, Judaism is more tolerant of beliefs and less tolerant of actions. Christianity is more tolerant of acts and less tolerant of heresy. As a matter of fact, the fact is that the 13 principles of faith of Maimonides were disputed at the time, and even today, while nobody would attack them frontally, why do such a thing? Opposing views are nevertheless studied, and Orthodox Jews who accept other ideas, such as those of Balei Karim, of Yosef Albo, who lived from 1380 to 1444, of Rabbi Chasdai Kreskas from 1340 to 4010, they're acceptable. These people are acceptable, valued members in Orthodox Jewish society, even though they don't subscribe to Maimonides' 13 principles. Some of them come from here. I would like to begin to end this talk with Ethics of the Fathers. The men of the Great Assembly would always say these things: be cautious in judgment, establish many pupils, and make a safety fence around the Torah. I think it is incumbent on all Noahides to be cautious in judgment, especially of one another. We have no time or energy to waste on inter-Noahide disputes. This includes being careful with criticism of one another. We should establish many pupils. We must all work in parallel to teach. This is our primary function, certainly at this stage of the development of the Noahide movement, to teach. To teach anyone who will listen, anyone who can be attracted to listen. And we have to make a safety fence around the Torah, and the safety fence is primarily good education, as discussed above. I do not expect to see every Noahide community acting in the same way. Depending on the origin, Noahides will and should develop differently, somewhat differently. In that sense, I am a follower of Rabbi Ben Amozeg and of Rabbi Steinsaltz. One of the most interesting issues is the limits of these differences. I do not say, and do not think that they should be addressed at this stage in positive action items. But this is something that should be considered when we have enough communities to begin worry about that. As soon as God helps us to achieve many communities. What's another thing that Noahide organizations and Noahide nations should do is research and development. Every organization has to do research and development if it wants to advance. I would point one of the groups doing research, which may be of interest to Noahides to be in touch with them, is a group called the Pew Forum on Religion. Very interesting. They published, for instance, the statistic, a research they did last year. 25% of the young people in the USA today to choose to leave the church of their parents. 25%. For Noahides, this is a great challenge and a great opportunity. 25% of the youth are willing to listen to you. So how many people are there? There are 300 million, say. And of this, you say at least, 100 million are on this age. 25% is 25 million. So please, in another 3 years, I want 25 million Noahides, okay? Yes, unfortunately, we have to laugh, but okay, we know at least what we should try to do. We should try to find out what factors or combinations of factors enable and assist religious mobility. What factors or combination of factors hinder religious mobility? There are psychological, emotional, family, environmental. This has to be researched. A practical research should be in the field, can we recognize people, young people or people who are not so young, with the potential to become Noahides. I mean, they don't walk on here with a sign, I can become a Noahide. But you don't want to waste your efforts on people who will not listen to you. How can you find out in the first 3 minutes of a conversation whether a person is likely to listen or not? This is something that has to be investigated, has to be researched. One particular issue bothers me very much as a member of the Sanhedrin. Why is it that so many people who leave conventional Christianity join groups which claim that they are some kind of Jews, Ephraim or Joseph or 10 tribes or whatever? I don't know. Perhaps with research that Noahide nations or other organizations do, will find out what makes these people believe such strange ideas. Some people, not all of them Jews, claim this is all a camouflage for attempts to convert Jews to Christianity. I do not wish to believe this to be the whole truth. I would like to believe that not all is camouflage. I would like to believe some of this is bona fide. That a lot of it is based on some kind of strange wishful thinking, some kind of authentic wishing that this were true. And when one really wishes very hard that something is true, sometimes one begins to believe it, like the false prophets in Ezekiel 13:6, or like somebody wishing a particular horse will win a race and he begins to believe it and puts money on it. Or a stock will double in the next 2 months. People sometimes convince themselves and put money on it. That's pretty bad. Tragic sometimes. If we could understand the psychology, perhaps we know how to help these people, 10 tribes, Ephraim, whatever, get over this weakness and get back to reality. These people are dangerous. One of the reasons Sanhedrin is afraid of them, not because they're making mistakes. People make mistakes all along. If I could list all the mistakes I've made in my life, we'd be here until midnight. But what is clear is that there is mobility is not only from Christianity. There is danger to many young, ignorant Jews who may be influenced by these people to convert to their form of Christianity. So we have to be very careful. Rabbi Richmond pointed this danger out to me. I mean, halachically, these people are okay. They may be okay. Some kind of Christianity is tolerated by Ashkenazic decisors. Christianity, Rabbi Seinzal says that Christianity can be compatible with keeping the 7 commandments and with believing that they come from God. I mean, that it is not contradiction. Excuse me for saying so, it's a superfluous addition, which is not necessary and which is also wrong. But being wrong is not a crime. But being mendacious and trying to convert Jews to Christianity is very much a crime, and so we have a problem there. Can we separate the bona fide people who are making mistakes from the mendacious people? We don't know how to do that. Maybe you can help us with the research. How to do the research? Well, one method could be introspection, not with these strange groups, but with research. Perhaps Noahide could analyze factors in their own personal history and see what were the elements in their own personalities which caused and enabled you to make the great step you did. Which ways can one quickly discover a person to influence be a Noahide? One issue which arose a few times was conversion to Judaism. As you probably are aware, the traditional Jewish attitude is not to encourage conversion. While there are some, in our synagogue we have Dr. Borchardt, who's a Dutch doctor who came and he really found his place in our synagogue. But when I was a young man, there was a convert in Tel Aviv who maybe found his satisfying relationship with the Almighty, but he didn't find his place on this earth. And for the Noahide community, I think conversion is a loss. The good influence that a Noahide can have among non-Jews is much greater than the influence a Jew can possibly have. The last aspect of my vision, I would like to tell you how important the Noahide movement is for Jews. Some things have been said. I want to point out another aspect. For over 3,000 years, the development of Torah, thought, and interpretation centered around the Jews and was occupied with Jewish observance. This is a one-sided development. The Medrash says the Torah has 70 facets. There are 70 nations. Is there a correlation between the number of facets and the number of nations? If there is, then we've been developing only one facet. There are another 69 around there, and we haven't been developing them. So the Jewish understanding of the Torah also will be influenced by the Noahide movement. Now that was a midrashic term, right? 70 facets and so on, 70 nations. But in direct language, I would like to propose that the emergence of the Noahide movements puts new challenges to the rabbis and the decisors. Much of our tradition has to be reviewed in response to queries of Noahides when they ask questions, real life questions that they feel are important for their lives. That's the only way you get a right answer, if it's applicable. And a theoretical answer is not sufficient. Rabbi Reuven now. I got a Rabbi Reuven last night. I didn't hear him this morning, unfortunately. But last night he said we have to rule ourselves with our hearts. Not with our hearts, but with our minds. We have hearts, they make us go. How we go, where we go, has to be controlled from up here. Our heart is a driving force. Our feelings are driving forces. Our minds have to use that force to direct it. In the commandment of tzitzit, it says, Lo tatur acharei levavchem v'acharei nechem. You should not follow the inclinations of your heart and your eyes. Rabbi Richard mentioned the connection between the commandment of tzitzit and the story of Korach, which we read tomorrow. I would like to stress one aspect of this perspective, which I received in an email last night from my son Aviyad, who is working on his doctorate in Talmud at Bar-Ilan University, which he addressed to this congregation here. Korach said, all the congregation is holy. Why did he say that? What was the benefit? There are two assumptions here. All of Israel is as holy as Aaron is. And it seems that this is a good thing to say because it's wrong to discriminate between people. Korach was saying, don't discriminate. And we are all sons of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so why should there be any born difference between people? I mean, people are born male or female, but are people born holier than one than the other? Well, it's a good question, isn't it? Well, Moses seems to disagree with both ideas of Korach. First, he says in Leviticus, he said, "Become holy, for I am HaShem your God." And he said in the commandment at the end of the passage, which talks about this, he says, "Be holy unto your God. V'yitem kedoshim le'Elohechem." Before the revelation at Sinai, he also said, "Atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim," you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Again, he's said that there is one nation which should be holy, holier than the others. What is the advantage of such an arrangement? There are two types of holiness. Apparently, one into which one is born, and another which one takes upon oneself. A holiness one chooses for oneself, which one has to work to achieve, and one has to live within and keep, cherish. Korach wanted to blur the difference with the idea of equality in mind, but Korach, saying that everyone is holy, this has two implications. First of all, if you are born holy, you don't have to strive and work for holiness, you're there. You don't have to work. Secondly, if people are born holy, it may even weaken you. You say you don't know that holiness can be achieved. We're there, so we can go and play. And we may never even think that there's no difference at all. It doesn't mean anything, because we're all there. So it's very important there should be holiness which can be achieved. So what's the importance of born holiness? I made a case for holiness which we're not born into. What is the case for holiness which one is born into? Well, if there were no holiness in the world, if everything had to be achieved, and there were no holiness in the world, we could easily reach a state where there's no holiness at all. Nobody would choose to make the effort to be holy. We wouldn't even know that such a thing exists. And so we have some people who are born holier than others. I'm a Kohen. I have certain regulations which are relatively easy to keep, certain regulations which are very difficult to keep. The regulation which is very difficult to keep is to refrain from coming into contact with dead Jews. We cannot be in the same building. When a Kohen goes to a hospital, he has a problem. When my daughters-in-law gave birth, I didn't go to visit them in the hospital. I knew that. I can talk to them on the phone, and if I have a video phone, I can even smile at them, but I cannot visit them at the hospital. It's not easy, but it's part of the deal. You have a deal. I have a commandment which is to bless people. It says I have to bless people with love. You mean I got to love all of those people out there? How do I do that? Can I possibly do that? Well, it's my duty to do that. I got to think positively, and if I have somebody who I really can't stand, I got to get over that. I got to get over that every day before I go up and bless them. It's my duty to overcome my feelings. Well, I don't have so many bad feelings, so that's all right. For me, it's pretty easy. Now, this made one of the part of the relationship between Israel and the Noahides. Israel is expected to live a life of holiness, but there is no alternative and there is no choice involved. Bnei Noach are people who have a fully free choice. In that aspect, the Noahides are in a better position than the Jews are, and I hope that you make full use of this possibility which you have and which we don't. And Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.